had a guest on our podcast recently, and he said that they celebrate their failures. And that really changed my perspective on failure. I mean, of course, it's changed over time as an entrepreneur naturally, but going back to the IPO and the acquisition, did SpaceX kind of open a lot of eyes, investors' eyes, and say, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on here?
I mean, certainly SpaceX has been the most successful private space company ever. And they've paved the way, especially in that they have created low-cost launch.
Progress does not happen without taking risks and investment. And
the media still reports it wrong. They report, oh, there was a failure. And they just don't get it, because that's like that wasn't the point. The point was to blow it up. Like, they were trying to see what happened.
Most founders talk about scaling companies. Today's guest is building the infrastructure for an economy that doesn't fully exist yet. I'm Eric Josovitz, and this is Growth Under Pressure. Today, I'm joined by Gary Kownen, co-founder and CEO of CisLunar Industries, a company laying the groundwork for sustainable industry between the Earth and the Moon. Gary, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Same here. Your path is pretty unique. Finance, entrepreneurship, and then building infrastructure for space. Take us a bit back. How did you end up working at the intersection of finance, engineering, and the space economy?
Right. Yeah, it's a bit of a windier path than what people think you take to get into the space industry. Usually people are thinking, and I thought this too, that it's, you got to be an engineer, and then, you could find your way into that industry. That's the main way of getting there. But I mean, really, if I go back, my interest in space started when I was much younger. I remember watching shuttle launches in the 80s, in grade school around a tiny television, in the early days when every launch was a major spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of where I got really interested and curious about it from a very early age. I remember in maybe the turn of the 90s time frame, between the 80s and the 90s, must have been about 12. I have a pretty vivid memory of taping together pieces of graph paper so that I could map out a lunar base. And I must have read something in Popular Science or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It sparked this idea in my imagination to think about, you could plan out the different things you would have there. Anyway, I wish I still had that graph, but put it in a frame somewhere. But yeah, I mean, so I had this early interest in space. I ended up going to the Air Force Academy from high school, and I'm sure there are many cadets who have gone through the academy that had this same idea that I'm going to go there. This is the way that I can fly, and I can get an engineering degree, and I can maybe become a test pilot, and then I could become an astronaut. That was really the old-fashioned traditional way of becoming an astronaut. It turns out that the Air Force Academy wasn't for me in the end, and I left before I would have been committed to stay there for a whole career, which was right before my junior year. And then then I went to the University of Colorado and ended up in a different path. I ended up going down a business and economics degree kind of path, not an engineering degree. I still needed that outlet for creative, stuff. And I discovered entrepreneurship for me was one of those creative outlets. It was sort of another way to build something, right? And kind of push the envelope of whatever it was that I was working on. So I had my first company right out of college. And I continued on, that was, we can get into that if you want to, but that was a company that's not into the space industry at all. It was a designated driver service called Night Riders. If you Google it, you can find old videos of me that we made for that business. The idea was we drove people home in their own cars when they had too much to drink. So it was we would provide a driver to drive you in your car, get home. And so if you drove down to the bars, and had too much to drink, we could drive you, and then your car would be at home with you in the morning. That was the basic idea. In the end, that didn't work out, but we ran it for a few years, for 4 years actually, raised a little bit of money. So it was kind of like an MBA in real time. And And then when that didn't work out, I mean, that was a whole nother interesting experience. But I went into the corporate world, kind of rebuilt my credit, got a normal job, if you will, working for a Fortune 1000 company in their consulting division. Was interested in equities trading and analysis, sort of another way of like being creative and trying to find ways to make wealth so that I could kind of do whatever I was interested in. Ended up getting my CFA, my Chartered Financial Analyst designation, which is all about expertise in trading equities and managing funds. Went down that path, ended up in the finance department. Then I ended up at an asset manager. Ended up at another corporate company that was around 200 million in revenue at the end of my sort of pre-space career. And that was all these experiences. The entrepreneurship experience really like sparked that interest in doing something entrepreneurial. And then those corporate experiences kind of showed me that, okay, there is something you can learn from what people have already done before and like take some of those lessons. But it also showed me that I didn't want to be in a standard kind of salary job, that I needed that, I don't know, the fire that comes from trying to build your own thing. And I also never lost sight of this dream to be in space. I still today have a dream to go to space someday. And I think as costs go down, I do intend to do that someday. But I wanted to find a way to get into the industry. And I even was considering going back to college to get my bachelor's in engineering and just like basically start over. And I was a director of finance at this time. Like I'd built a whole career around finance.
Yeah.
And my wife was like supportive. She was like, okay, well, I mean, if you really want to do that, like I'll support you, but you're starting over. Like maybe there's another way you could do this. So I started to look around at ways to get into the industry that weren't being an engineer. And I didn't want to go into the finance department of a large company like Lockheed or something, because I felt like that would be the same job that I was doing already, but just in a different company. And so I learned about the International Space University, which is, an institution that has been around for over 30 years. And, it gives you this, there's two different programs. There's a graduate program, but there's also this 9-week like seminar, basically. It's called the Space Studies Program. And it goes around to different cities around the world. So it's an international thing. The year that I tuned into this, it was in Cork, Ireland. And I decided in 2017 to go to the International Space University, where I could get like an education that was sort of a mile wide and a foot deep across the entire space industry, everything from, rocket propulsion technology to like business to, art in space, like really the whole sweep of society in space, basically. It's sort of part of the philosophy behind it. And it's very international, has people from all over the world, different countries. But for me, it was the perfect environment to like get my feet wet in the industry, learn enough about it, and have a network coming out of it where I could really test out ideas that I was starting to have around what could somebody build in the space industry as an outsider. And I was also inspired around the same time, and not coincidentally, in the end, it turns out, by Peter Diamandis, who wrote a book that he published around that time called Bold, which one of the premises of the book is that, you don't need to be an expert in something to build a business in that industry, that you can go out and find other people who have expertise to match your skill set. And together, if you have a big ambition, you can attract really talented people by just putting a big goal out there and saying, hey, we're going to do this amazing thing. Do you want to come along? And so that was a very inspiring idea to me. And I took that idea, and it turns out that he was one of the co-founders of the International Space University. So I think that's where I first heard about it, actually. And so, I went to the International Space University with that idea in mind, with that kind of philosophy in the back of my mind, I guess. And I went there with the idea to find other people who would fill the other, gaps in my knowledge, the expertise in technical areas, engineers, who also wanted to be an entrepreneur, who already were entrepreneurs and want to do something that was kind of out on the edge of human expansion into space. And the idea there is like, okay, where in an industry can you make a dent as an outsider? Like, could you do something that could have a big enough impact that, even without expertise, you could do it? And to me, it's like on the frontier of human expansion into space, everybody's a novice, even people who are engineers, like, who've done space missions. They're still relatively, no one's done it yet.
Yeah.
It's kind of a greenfield. And yeah, that was, with that in mind, like I went to the International Space University and found some other people who were interested in going on an adventure and trying to build a space company. And wanted to do something around resources, which I had determined through my research and inspiration from other people who'd been down this path before, that if we're going to build a human presence beyond Earth, we need to have a sustainable, we need to be able to use the resources that are there. We can't keep shipping things up all the time. Otherwise, it's just a camping trip,
Right.
And so, resources to me was that first plank in like a foundation, or the first brick in a foundation to build a sustainable presence of humanity beyond Earth. And so when I was at ISU, we just looked at the value chain for resources, to take resources out in space and turn them into something we could use in space, not necessarily to bring back, but to actually use in space to build stuff. And we just mapped out the value chain on a whiteboard one day. And we saw that there were, in the extraction end of it, there were companies that were talking about mining asteroids or mining the moon. And then there were companies on the other end of the spectrum who were talking about manufacturing in space, whether that's on the lunar surface or in orbit. And they had ideas around how do you take the mined resources and then turn them into something you could use for manufacturing. But no one was focused on that interim step of how do you, being basically the mills, the steel mills or the aluminum, foundries of space, to take those raw materials and turn them into something that can be used for manufacturing. And I got
Yeah.
So anyway, that setup, seeing that gap from a top-down perspective, I think because I came in from the outside and I'm not an engineer, I don't have a preconceived notion of how things work in space. I was kind of naively hey, if we're going to have a civilization in space, we need, industry that can take resources and turn them into manufactured goods. And there's no steel mills. We could be the Andrew Carnegies of the next century and build the steel mills of the next industrial revolution in space. And then from there, we had this other insight that came out of being at ISU, which was learning about space debris and how much was up there, and that there was so much of how it worked and sort of the orbits that it was in and how orbits work. And I was very naive to all these things, which was probably to my benefit because I didn't realize how hard some of these ideas could be. But I just kind of asked the question, why don't we mine the space debris first, and actually use that as a resource? There's all this refined metal there, other things. And so that was the initial spark that took us down a path where we wanted to be the steel mills in space, and maybe we could access the resources that were already there from launched, hardware that was no longer functional, space debris or old satellites. And that led to an idea that, okay, what if we use old satellites and we recycle them and process them as the first feedstock for a foundry capability? Well, now we'll learn how to build a foundry that can process metals in space. And this is a little simpler because they're already refined. We just have to melt them down and maybe change their shape, maybe purify them or filter them or whatever. And, at the same time, we will turn something that is presently a major cleanup problem, cost kind of problem, into a mining opportunity, right? If you can treat those old satellites as a resource, now you have, a value proposition for people to go out and get them.
And mining in space.
Yeah. And there's mining, people are pursuing ideas around mining, but this way you're cleaning up and you're mining, in space. And so that was the origin story for the company, got us going on this idea of resources and recycling space debris. And in the end, we decided to go to Luxembourg because they had just launched their first space resource. They launched something called the Space Resources Initiative, where they got into the idea of asteroid mining. So Luxembourg's a tiny country, right? But they're not going to ever get any more territory. But one way they can take their sovereignty and leverage it is to go out and license companies to mine asteroids, right? So that they got into this idea, and now they're one of the players in space resource utilization. And we thought, okay, we're in Ireland. My co-founders that I brought into the company were not Americans, so maybe it'll be easier for us to start a company in Europe and pursue this initiative that Luxembourg is doing. And if you're going to mine things from asteroids, you need a way to process them. So we fit into the ecosystem quite nicely. And they were receptive to this idea. We pursued it with them for a little while. I mean, in the end, they needed us to be able to get to a viable business model that would generate revenues in a relatively short period of time, say 10 years. And it was hard to prove. I mean, this was in 2017. We were a bit early on some of these ideas. It was a bit difficult to prove that we could do that to them. So we got pretty far in the process, but we couldn't quite get over the hump and get funding. And so at that point, we decided, okay, we're going to go. I was born and raised in the United States. I could move the company to the US. I lived in Denver anyway. We could structure the company in the US so that we could go after NASA grants. And that led us to our first NASA contract in 2021. And also through all that process, I also met our last co-founder, Joe Pawelski, who was a School of Mines student at the time in their space resources program. And so that sort of crystallized the founding team. It was me, Walter Schroeder, who was there in the very beginning, Toby Mold, who's there in the very, very beginning. Walter is from Germany, Toby is from the UK, and then Joe came in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. But we just had it was the right time to have this idea to recycle things in space, where NASA took an interest in what we were doing and our start. So that's how I got. It's like a long way of telling you how I got into the space industry, and then how the company sort of was founded. And we have since largely pivoted the company to other business models around power. But we can talk about how we get there as well. But I'll stop there because there's a lot to digest, I guess.
What a journey. To say that you were building the Uber of before Uber,
right? Before there were smartphones.
Yeah, before there were smartphones. And it's funny because I went on a trip with my family, and we have a guy, a retired guy that came by, got in our SUV and drove us to the airport, came back and took us. So when you said that, I was like, it's actually a viable model that makes sense. And I wish there was a tool out there that, of course we have our guy now if we need it. But so to go from that to getting into finance in a CFA, like, just for people listening, a CFA is no small feat. It's like, you've heard of a CPA, which is really tough. And I always hear that a CFA is another level of difficulty.
It took, the fastest you can get through the 3 tests is 2.5 years. It took me 3.5 years to get through it. And you need then, I think, 4 years of experience that you can use to claim the moniker.
That's wild. And so you got into corporate, did financial analysis, became a director of finance in corporate, right? Like, you're not working at just like a mom and pop up the street doing.
No, this is like a $200 million revenue business. Yeah, we did some M&A stuff while I was there, and sort of got to know how that works. It was a PE owned company. I think there was 2 firms that owned us while I was there, and then they merged with their largest competitor. So
that's incredible. I'm curious what your take is on going back to school. Of course, like there's a lot of folks out there that they start a career, they don't want to go get a certification, or they don't want to go back to school or get an MBA. Do you have hey, this worked, this didn't work guidance on that?
I mean, the CFA was a great experience. That was the extent of me going back to school, I guess, was to get that CFA designation. I did consider going back for engineering, as I mentioned. It's funny, when I got done with all the tests from the CFA, I do remember distinctly thinking, like, I was now going to go into that industry, and I was thinking, I'm not sure that this is the job that I want to take. So I had this kind of instinct at that time, but it was like, oh, is that because I'm afraid to, like, I have a resistance to going out looking for a job, or, like, I don't know, there's lots of reasons why you might have that emotion.
Yeah.
So obviously I was going to give it a shot, which I did, but and then see. But in the end, it was true. Like I mean, I handle the finances for our company now because I have, out of the founders, I have the financial experience. But and we have a fractional CFO, and we will hire probably somebody in house, pretty soon. But when I was in my last job, I mean, I did good work, but I could feel myself getting bored,
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to get on to the next thing. And it was I mean, their team was great. Like, it had nothing to do with the company. The company was great, and the people were great. And like, people matter a lot in a corporate job. If you've got good people around you, you can do almost any kind of corporate job. But I just knew that I needed something that was more, I don't know, invigorating, I guess.
Yeah, and chasing that dream, that underlying passion that you've always had, it sounds like. But you've learned, you've gone on your journey from startup in the beginning to finance, and then you started, you went to the international, what is it called?
The
ISU?
International Space University, ISU.
Yeah, ISU. So, and did you get a certification, or were you just immersed in the
It was so the one I went, they do have a master's program in France that's like accredited and everything, where you would get a master's degree in
hmm
space studies, I think. I got a space studies certificate. It was a 9-week program that I did.
Okay,
So
so you get, I mean,
for me, it was like, mostly it was about getting into the network of like 5,000
right.
alumni that are across the whole world, in agencies and industries, and have started companies. So there's a quite a large group of people who are very supportive of anyone who's trying to do something. So you can always get a foot in the door somewhere, with that network.
That's incredible. So you get immersed in the network and into the ecosystem. You start learning, the good and the bad and what's missing, what's already available. Understanding, I assume it may be similar to government contract where you can kind of bid or you can insert yourself into that world, and that's kind of now space, and now you're in the ecosystem. So let's fast forward a little bit to what life looks like today, and
hmm
how are you spending most of your time as a CEO of CisLunar?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's evolved, right, from startup till now. We've gone through, you know, plenty of life cycle aspects of going down that path. Right now, where we are as a company, just to put context around what life is like today, um, we are right at this stage where we have revenues, we've gotten contracts from the government and from commercial customers, over $10 million in sales today, which some of that's still being executed on. So, real company making revenues, 17 employees, but we're still right now making products for customers, whether it's the government or commercial, that are still kind of prototype stage products, or they're finished products, but they're for a customer's experiment. So they're still like low quantity, kind of bespoke at the moment. And we have this vision to turn these various power system products, and I'll explain that maybe a little bit here in a second, because that might be
Sure.
useful too.
Yeah.
Um, uh, we have these power products. So we're going from prototype scale to manufacturing. So this is the stage of a company where you go, where you've been deep tech company or hardware company, where you've been building stuff to try it out, and now we have to make a product that works so we can scale. So that's where we are. We haven't made the transition yet. We're making it right now, and so we've been raising money to do that, to set the stage for that. What's really cool is right now, coming into 2026. I mean, it's I had thought about this earlier today, like, oh, if we talk about this, will I talk about where I am, how it is to be me right now, or with, right now we're at this point in the company where we're in a transition from making prototypes for customers and for ourselves, for our own research, and for government contracts, and we're transitioning to setting up a manufacturing capability. And that's like
hmm
the whole reason we were raising money right now, is to fund this transition from prototype to manufacturing, where we can really build a capability that scales. And so I do expect my life, so what do I do every day, to change quite a lot in the coming weeks here, as this round finally finalizes and we close everything down and we start really moving into executing on this plan that we've developed. So lately it's been all about fundraising for the last year, basically. Certainly the last 6 months has been focused on that. And that's, mostly me in my office or traveling meetings and, trying to like put pitch decks together and that sort of thing. I'm strategizing about how to get the investors or how to sell the concept better. That we're, sometimes it's about how you communicate it. As we go into the next stage, though, I really am looking forward to, not focusing on fundraising, but rather focusing on executing the business and spending more time in our lab. So I live in Denver, which is about an hour away from where our lab is, which is in Loveland, Colorado. So, given that I was mostly just on phone calls anyway, it didn't make a whole lot of sense for me to go up and back and forth to the lab. So I spent most of my time not in the lab, but I really want to get up there, a couple times a week at least, and get a much closer sense of how the process is going, be able to think about how do we execute more effectively, how do we turn this into a product faster, set up the manufacturing line, be able to help with all those operational pieces of the puzzle, which I think will be really exciting. And we're going to be bringing on additional, people into the company, more engineers, and probably some more support people, maybe a finance person. So there's some different elements that we're bringing into the field that will, change the nature of my work as CEO to hopefully just being mostly about removing obstacles and finding ways to do business better and trying to keep all the pieces moving together.
And what does the end result look like? Is it an acquisition? Is it IPO? Is it, just continuing to build and pass it on to the next generation? What does that look like for you? I know, I know there's a lot of options, so there, there may be multiple.
Yeah, and I have 3 other co-founders, and we have if you count the co-founders, we have 17 employees, including a couple of contractors. So we try to get everybody a piece of the pie with the company, so that there's a lot of stakeholders. Obviously, each of the co-founders might have their own personal thing. We've talked about this, but we're for the most part very well aligned on what we're trying to get out of it. So recently we decided that with some of the very successful IPOs in the space industry of late, the IPO market can wax and wane as it does over time, right? But it definitely showed that the space industry has matured to a point where there are big exits on the IPO market. It's not just acquisitions. Previously the only exits you had were, for the most part, were acquisitions. And then you had the whole SPAC thing that went for a couple of years really hot. And there was a number of space companies that went public that way. And then that kind of crashed out in many ways, as it seems to do with these things over time. But and now there's an IPO market that's real, and it's becoming, and it's also showing the amount of capital being invested is really kind of amazing, actually. So it's really starting to trend up a lot. And I think there's going to be, the way the industry's moving, we're hitting that sort of inflection point in the business, where in the industry at large, where we're going past just launching satellites and having them do something. Now we're getting into the ideas of like data centers in space and in-space servicing and transportation. And these require all kinds of ancillary capabilities around them. And of course, we try to make a component that all of them need. So we have this nice picks and shovels kind of approach to things. But that's where nascent economies really start to hit that curve and grow really big. And then you don't even know what kinds of ideas people have, because as new things get created, new problems get revealed and new solutions get created and so on. And you have this really great explosion. For me, when I got into the industry, I thought, it reminded me, the moment for the space industry reminded me, even back in 2017, of like the internet in the mid to late 90s when I was a teenager. Like, it just felt like that really early moment where things, like anything is possible. We don't know what people are going to do with it, but it's going to be big, and so, and that, I still think we're in that moment here, but it's starting to hit that, growth moment, growth trajectory. So for exit strategy, for us, like, we decided that we want to now take the company to where it could go public. Whether at the time it makes sense to go public is a different question to assess as we get closer to that time frame. But within the next 5 years, we think there's a real potential to grow revenues to a point to like the $300 to $400 million per year kind of range, where you could do a serious over $1 billion valued IPO easily. I mean, some of the IPOs that went recently were like, I think Firefly recently IPO'd over the summer, and it was something like 63 times revenues, which is just a massive multiple.
That's nuts.
I mean, I don't expect to get that. That's like an unsustainable kind of thing.
Even half of that
if you
is
just
still
apply
big.
normal multiples, like it's still, if we can get to 300 to 400 million and we're on a growth trajectory, that works. And the way we're approaching our product, it's, we're designing I mean, maybe it's a good, should I talk about the product we actually make? I don't think we actually talked about that yet.
Yeah, please.
So I like to use this as an example. So this is, I don't know if you can see this. This is a laptop charging thing, right? It's a box. Everybody knows what these look like. I mean, a lot of times now there's just a box that goes straight into the wall, but this one and many others like it are, you have a box and you have a cord that goes to the power source, which is the plug in the wall. And then you have another cord that goes to the computer, right? Every electronic device that we use in our lives and the industry uses and that happens in space, everything where they use electricity, which is everywhere, has a power transformation device of some kind, because power always comes in a certain way off the grid or from a solar panel or a battery or whatever. And it needs to be conditioned and, transformed into different voltages and amperages and so on to do whatever it's supposed to do. And so we figured out, as we were pursuing the idea I told you about before, which was how we process metal in space, that the power system we built for that system, which was an electrically driven furnace, could be used for lots of other things. And it was a different approach than what, traditional space suppliers were making. So, and it had some advantages. It was, it was using some modern subcomponents, different kinds of materials like GaN, which is gallium nitride, a certain kind of chip that people use. It's sort of radiation tolerant. And you see, they use that in lots of consumer electronics now that make things really small. But that's a good thing for space too. It's very efficient. That and the architecture itself is just different and a little bit better. And so we realized that we could take the thing we made for the furnace, and this came out of a project we were doing for Space Force, and that same architecture could be used to run an electric propulsion thruster. So one is running a furnace, very different, you would think, from a propulsion thruster.
Oh, yeah.
But it turns out that the electronics were very similar. So we tested this idea out with partners. Safran Space, partnered with us to test the idea out. Lent us a thruster for a few months over the summer a couple of years ago. We built our power system at that time into something that could run, that thruster, the all parts of it. And that worked. And so we realized, okay, maybe we have something here that's kind of interesting. It can run a furnace. We know it can run a thruster. And then we're like, well, what else could it run? And so it started, as we sort of think about it, we realized that the fundamental core of this thing that transforms power efficiently, and, it has smaller size and mass than other things, could be used for basically almost any kind of application in space where you need to take power and transform it so that it can do a job. And every satellite has probably multiples of these for different use cases, either run a sensor or a transmitter or a thruster or the satellite itself. And so now we have this capability that's like the big vision, and this is why it's suitable for IPO, which is kind of how I got down this path, is it's built to be modular and configurable to different use cases and different customers, and applied to many different functions, so cross-functional, right? So we start with this core. We know there's a market for power for thrusters. We build that one. And we realize, if we just add one other component, one other module, or maybe two other modules, we could use it for another application. Maybe it's high voltage, or maybe it's power beaming, or maybe it's direct energy, or there's all these ideas out there, or maybe it's a APU, which is like a auxiliary power unit, I think is what it stands for. But it's basically like you have a battery and a power transformer together. So there's these different applications that are needed across different industries for different use cases, and they share a lot of similarities. So we've designed and patented an architecture that allows us to treat these, like small changes from a module to the core system that will address a whole sweep of different applications. And that allows us to tap into a much bigger market than just saying, oh, we're going to make really great PPU for thrusters, which would probably be a great business, but not necessarily venture scale, which we've heard from some VCs where they're trying to figure out if it fits that, that framework. So for me, I guess, ask what I wanted, like, we're targeting to be able to go public by 2030, around that time frame is the idea.
Okay.
Our thinking is that if we can go public in 2030, we could also take other offers if they're great. So if somebody comes along and it's like, oh, this would be really great in our portfolio of companies, it would complement everything perfectly. Yeah, like, if it's the right price, we're not going to not look at it. So there's we're not. I mean, I think bottom line is like, I think we can take it all the way. I think we have the right team to do that, and we'll add other people as we go. But we are open-minded and pragmatic. So we just want to, get the right value for our shareholders and for ourselves, and we'll assess it as we go.
Does it need to be mission driven if it was a company that gave you the perfect price, but it was for maybe use here on planet Earth?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it would be nice.
Yeah.
I mean, when we started this thing out, like the idea was, to make a dent in a positive dent in the universe for human, like expansion into space. Like, it's a grand vision that I think is super positive for the human race and for everybody that I love and, everybody around us. And I don't know. I mean, I think there definitely are things we wouldn't sell it to. I mean, I know that line exists, right?
Yeah.
But even for, an excessively great deal, there are people we wouldn't sell to. So I guess you just have to assess it when it happens, right?
Yeah. And do you see it being built as a universally applied power bank that you can apply across the board for anything, just one out of the box component?
It's not quite like that. It's more like we think of it like Lego sets, which seems to, and sometimes that analogy can be overused sometimes in hardware because everybody wants to be modular, but for us, it's really true. Like there is a core set, that's kind of like the basic Legos that you have. And that is the core of any application. It can transform power from some range of voltages to another range of voltages.
Right.
And then with software and other modules, which could be specific kits, Lego kits, and like, Joe likes to say with this analogy, like Legos actually are very finely manufactured. Like they're very tightly spec'd so that they can stick together and stuff. So it is more apt than it might seem, but different Lego sets will enable certain things. So the way we think of it for the customer's experience, it's not like they just go to buy off the shelf one thing and they press a button and it works, right? Rather, they tell us what they want and we configure from a bunch of Lego pieces that are standardized and mass produced. So that gives us economies of scale, allows us to sell it for a lower price, has good consistency and standardization and scale. But we can configure those pieces very effectively. And the more we do this, the better we'll get at it. So that it feels to the customer like a custom build. But really it's a custom combination or configuration of, mass produced components. And we think that approach is kind of the innovation, part of the innovation for the company is to approach it.
So for specific applications, so just for someone like myself that's doesn't know much about space, it's like you're not going to use an iPhone charger for something big, right?
To
run like
or something like that.
Refrigerator. Yeah. Or vice versa. You're not going to use this massive power bank to charge your iPhone. It's going to explode.
And that's a good point, like a good way of thinking about it. I mean, for us, just to give you an idea of what we're involved in, we are in the higher power range for the space system. So think about 1,000 watts and over, like that this power bank I showed you earlier, that's 150 watts. So 1,000 watts is is pretty powerful, but it's not massively powerful for a lot of terrestrial applications. You can think of that in the context of like electric cars and stuff, which are many kilowatts, in terms of their power.
Mm-hmm.
But for a satellite, that's, pretty decent sized satellite these days. That's what most of them are heading towards. They're not quite there yet. In terms of like thruster power, I should say, because the satellite itself could have like a typical Starlink is somewhere in the range of like 10 kilowatts of power generation, somewhere in that ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
But we are also working on programs with the Space Force that are more long-term research projects into nuclear electric propulsion. We have a nuclear reactor on a spacecraft that creates electricity to drive a plasma thruster, and we're building the over 100 kilowatt sized thing. So that kind of shows you our expectation of how much it can scale with the same core approach to the problem.
Very interesting. I want to go back to really good. Thank you for all the details on that. Definitely gives me a full picture of what you guys are building. Going back to the IPO and the acquisition,
Yeah.
did SpaceX kind of open a lot of eyes, investors' eyes, to say there's a lot of stuff going on here?
I mean, certainly SpaceX has been the most successful private space company ever. And they've paved the way, especially in that they have created low-cost launch and the potential for launch to get much lower than it even is today. They charge what they can charge. So they're not necessarily charging at the lowest price they could charge. Competition will help to drive that down. But they certainly paved the way. Them and a couple other companies that were early on, like Planet Labs, which is now just called Planet, also became public. I think they're a SPAC. There's like Spire. There's a few of them that were early that were like, oh, we think we can. Planet in particular, I think their story is that they just wanted to see if they could launch a cell phone the way it is without any special radiation treatment to space and see if it would take pictures. And it worked. And so,
Wow.
and because it was so small, it was inexpensive. And this coupled with this concept of a CubeSat, which allowed people to, put basically off the shelf components, which was a totally new idea. They were cheap. They were maybe like for automotive or even less, precise than automotive components. Put it in a satellite. It's only the size of a 10 by 10 centimeter cube or 3 by 3 inches roughly. That doesn't cost that much to put in a satellite. And then some launchers started to do what's called a ride share, where you would have like customer, and they would take most of the lift capacity. But there was all this other room on the rocket. So you could stick these tiny satellites up and down in there, and they would launch them out as they went when they got to their orbit. And so that combination of low, off the shelf components being tested out, the innovation of the small size so that they could try it at a low cost, as a ride share, and then SpaceX coming along saying we want to build reusable rockets, where people thought that was basically impossible before they did it. I remember here talking to engineers early on who, even after they had shown they could do it, was like, that's still not going to work as a business. It's not like, doesn't make any sense. I mean, imagine launching a pencil over a building and landing it on its tip. But that's what they do routinely now, right? So it's certainly changed the paradigm completely. And now, and they've also pioneered not just that they've dropped launch costs, but also the approach. Because if you think about it, before SpaceX, blowing up a rocket would be a massive tragedy. Like it would, you would imagine the program would be done completely, and you would have to have big investigation about why it failed. And since it's probably NASA, you'd have Senate hearings and whatever. Like it would just be a mess. So you see this, NASA became very overly careful on many missions because of that idea, like we can't fail. And SpaceX came along like, we're going to fail to learn.
Yeah.
And that kind of approach has enabled the idea of entrepreneurial space in a way that wasn't really available before. I mean, people tried it a couple of times, but it really became real when Planet and a couple others and SpaceX started to actually do entrepreneurial things in space. And that was a few years before I was starting to look around and like, man, this thing's starting to happen. Like I could finally get into space the way I always wanted to,
Yeah.
So yeah, they've made a definite huge impact and continue to do so.
That's a great point because progress does not happen without taking risks and investment. And
Yeah.
it's crazy to see the billions of dollars that are not, someone would just say they're thrown in the trash, but they're not. They're
No,
used like to
and they
advance.
still, the media still reports it wrong. They report, oh, there was a failure, and they just don't get it because that's like that wasn't the point. The point was to blow it up. Like they were trying to see what happened.
We
I
had
mean,
a
it'd be
we
great
we had a
if it
guest.
failed, but they don't care. That's not so much that if it fails, they learn a lot for the next.
Yeah, we had a guest on our podcast recently, and he said that they celebrate their failures, and that
Mm-hmm.
really changed my perspective on failure. I mean, of course, it's changed over time as an entrepreneur naturally, but
Right,
to
right,
celebrate not just the wins, but to celebrate the failures, it's just and one big takeaway from that is that now they're when they do fail, it's a different mindset, or they learn, or what happened is a different um size. It's not, something that would have been something catastrophic is hey, you know what, this has happened to us before, and this actually is a little bit less than that. Now we know how to overcome it. We've celebrated this
right,
before, let's do it
right.
again.
I mean,
So
it allows you to go so much faster when you're not afraid to fail and like overdoing things to make them less likely to fail. When in fact, you might be doing it wrong. Like maybe it's going to fail anyway, So, I mean, I don't know who you were talking to, but there's a company called Orbit Fab here in Colorado also. And they have a
mhm.
wall of failure that they have where they actually have like pictures of things they tried that didn't work. And they have a little story about what it was. And that's like they don't just celebrate it in a meeting, but they actually put it on the wall to say like, here's how we celebrate. It's not celebrating failure. It's like it's
Wow.
celebrating risk taking, in a calculated.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was Alex Johnston, who's the head of global operations and finance for an app called Glorify. They're like the number one devotional app on the apps. It's very very interesting, very smart guy. So, but a different industry, but still applies across the
Totally.
board.
Yeah.
Tons
And it
to build
removes
on.
that shame element that could creep in if you feel bad about like being responsible for an initiative that didn't work. I don't want people to wallow in shame. I want them to be like, okay, this happened. Let's look at what we can learn from it and, move on and do the next thing and not be afraid.
Yeah,
That's the
especially
important.
especially the resource side of it. Oh, whether it's money or resources or material, um, everything can be rebuilt. That's well, not everything. I don't want to use absolutes, but most things
Right.
can be rebuilt. So tons to build on. You know, in all of our podcasts, we ask about this growth under pressure moment, and you more than anyone have gone through those pivots,
Mhm.
going in industry to industry, learning curves, taking big risks, now in, one of the highest stakes industries. Can you think of one or two growth under pressure moments where you were like, I'm not sure what tomorrow looks like?
I mean, I could probably think of a dozen, but I thought about this a little before. I think there's two that are kind of interesting. So I'll go back to when I was at the Air Force Academy. Like I said in the beginning, I didn't stay in the military, but I was there for 2 years and 2 months. I went through freshman year, which is where the hard year where you're treated differently than the other cadets and really put under pressure, right? And there's this thing they do at the end called recognition. So when I was there in 90, this would be 96, 97 that year. Uh, like your freshman year lasted from basic training, which started in June, I think, and then went all the way until March, which was recognition. And once you're
Mhm.
recognized, now you're an upperclassman. You're treated like an equal, and you've made it. You belong here now. And up to that point, you're proving yourself whether you belong there or not. And so, but recognition weekend is that some other place you might hear about like Hell Week or whatever, and it's one of those kind of things where they just push you so hard. Like you've been pushed the whole year, but now you're getting extra pushed. But you also kind of know you're almost at the end. So there's a double thing there. Like that if you can just stick it out and it's through this hard moment, you have a light at the end of the rainbow. And the first day out of 4, like it doesn't seem so close, but as you get to the third day, now it's starting like, okay, I can feel it. Now it almost is kind of fun to be pushed hard, right? But what I noticed in that experience, even though I left in the end after the next year of school there, that really showed me, like I went way past what I thought my physical limitations were. Like I got to the physical limitation I thought was there, and it just was, and we just kept going like days past it. And it was just, the thing there wasn't how far I could get. It was mostly just that whatever I think my limit is probably not my limit. If it doesn't kill me, it's probably not my limit. And so that I think really stuck in the back of my head as a foundational just realization that you can do a lot more than your, like those monkey mind kind of stories that spin around in your head that telling you can't do something. You can do a lot more than they can do, and you can do a lot more than you think you can do, even when you're in the best mind state. And so that has been just a pressure cooker moment that helped me out ongoing. Then, throughout my entrepreneurial career, there's been so many. With this company, we have gone through many moments where we were trying to figure out if this made any sense at all. Before we got our first contract, especially because we were from 2017 to 2021 before we got our first contract. And we just, there was things that kept us going. But in the last year, it's been really remarkable for this company because we got to the end of the year in 2024, or got to kind of at the end of the summer around Q4, we had a situation where our most recent government contract had finished. We had wrapped it up successfully. We had the employees on the company that were there to execute that contract. And then we had another contract that was a commercial contract that was looking really promising, but we only had one. And that customer ran into their own challenges and had to put the project on hold kind of indefinitely. And that was like our main source of revenue. And we didn't have a whole lot of extra cash sitting around to survive on. So it was a very much a, oh shit kind of moment. We only had, maybe when we first heard about it or started to realize it was going to be a thing, like a month and a half of runway left to keep going or so. And yeah, it pushed the team, it pushed the executive team, hard. And we worked through some disagreements about what should be done, of course, as you would expect. And we ended up, briefly to extend the runway and give the company as much, leeway as possible. Like the whole team came together, the employees and the founders, to say, okay, what if, we'll take half our paychecks for hopefully only a paycheck or two. Because we sort of started to see that there was people we were talking to who could help us. We were talking to debt investors, like we were running around anyway. So like we thought maybe we could get out of it. And the things just lined up in a way where, we did that furlough, that partial furlough, I guess, where we took people's salaries down by half for a paycheck. But then that was right at the end of the year. And there was a nice confluence of things. We've been talking to investors, one of which who's now become our lead investor in this round. And they've, put in over $1.7 million altogether in both rounds at this point in time. But we got them to, I think they had already invested some at that point as well, but we got them to, that was the first investment, I think. We got them to invest because there was an opportunity to get a NASA extension to our existing NASA contract, which was ending, if we got matching investments. And it was like, okay. And the timing was like right at January. So it was, you sometimes need these moments to push people off the fence and get them to commit. And they came in, and a couple other investors came in. We also had gotten a loan from a guy, a private lender, who's been a true angel coming in, at the moment when we were at our least secure as a company, and, treated us fairly, charged interest, but that was okay. Wow. I was willing to pay for it.
That's hard.
And I know it was like a really lucky break we got from talking to a lot of people. Somebody connected us with this guy, and we took this loan, and then we got some investment, and then we got our next contract, and we were back out of it again. And now this is just a year ago, we were like on life support to some extent, in the back half of December, a year ago. I could see a path, but it was not certain at all. And that is a pressure cooker, man. Like when you get it kind of running right down to the line,
Oh yeah.
that's a pressure cooker. But we know what we did to deal with it is we realized, man, it also happened over the holidays. So it was like Thanksgiving was when we
Oh,
were going
it's
to
rough.
figure out if we were going to if we were going to have to do a furlough, and like what a terrible message to have to deliver right before Thanksgiving. But
Hmm.
we got ahead of it on the advice of some other entrepreneurs in the industry who've gone through similar scenarios and come through it. Talk to your employees as early as you can. So as soon as we could see what was happening and that it wasn't going to change right away, like we don't want to worry people for no reason, but we want to make sure they had enough warning so that they could put things in place if they needed to take care of themselves. And so we tried to make sure they knew that it was coming, but we would give them an answer before Thanksgiving. And then when we didn't get the answer we wanted, we told them that we're working on some things, but like it looks like we're going to have to do this. So we just try to keep the communication up. And then we said, like, when we get through this, we're going to pay you back for the time that you don't get paid. And then a month later, we did that. So, everybody was made whole after that was over. And most of the employees stayed on. It's a real testament to like the cohesion of the team and their buy-in for what we were trying to do. And we just built a good group of people that wanted to see this thing through. And, we were committed to making sure that we took care of them if we could, to make sure they're back in line. And now we're just closing out a round. We get cash in the bank, ready to go from like survival mode to strategic mode, and it's pretty exciting kind of journey to go on. It's a comeback story, I guess. And
That's
these are the
incredible.
kind of things we publicize, right? But like, yeah, certainly looking back on it a year later, it's a great success story, I think, in many ways. Like you have to make hard decisions, through, you maximize your chance for success, and just try to be as rational about it as you can be. And the other thing that helped me in those moments to think through how do you like, because I had people who say, "Oh, how do you deal with this uncertainty and like pressure?" But
Hmm.
for some reason, I've always been able to I know that we've already built something good here. We've done no matter what, we've been able to do something that didn't exist before. We've been able to make an impact in the space industry. We've met thousands of people in the industry. And so have our employees, right? So everybody who's been part of this thing has gained from it, the experience, regardless of the outcome. And I sort of knew that even if it doesn't go the way we want it to, people will be okay. Like we'll be able to help each other. They'll
Yeah.
land on their feet, and that just I think that kind of confidence in everybody's ability to bounce back from it makes it easier to face the moment without just panicking. Because some part of you wants to do that.
I know it. Well, that's incredible. And there's nothing more that will bring a company together than those under pressure moments where you're not sure what tomorrow looks like. You kind of weed out the people that didn't really belong on the team. You're like, well,
Right.
you were more of a friend than family. And then the family members, they stick around and now they're
Mm-hmm.
blood. And now you're building towards something greater. And I have a small story. We have a client that right during COVID, they shut sports down, and this is a fantasy sports app that was with
Oh
us for
man.
5 years, and so no sports, no fantasy sports. So there's no
Right.
revenue at all, and we had gone through a small, we did million or two round, but we didn't have a ton of money left, so it was time to let everyone know that we don't have any money to pay anyone if we're gonna survive, and um, they announced last month that they are selling for 4.6 billion.
Oh
So
wow, that's amazing.
so and they've
I love
grown to
those
almost,
stories.
yeah, it's so incredible, and to grow to about 500 employees now from just a skeleton crew back in the day of people that just whoever wanted to stay on knowing that you weren't going to get a paycheck. It's just incredible to see the resilience of those people. So love hearing your story and how everyone came out and through that. And I'm sure you guys are going to get do big things. And then on the other point you made, I think everyone should go through that physical push, that because
Mm-hmm.
understanding that it's mental is incredible. You're like, oh my, I'm going through an exercise, and your mind says, oh, my legs hurt. Well, if you can control your mind in an exercise or in a workout, really just pushing,
Mm-hmm.
and for you to be doing it days on end after you were done, it just shows that someone can do an extra hour or do an extra
Yeah,
couple of hours,
exactly.
and that
Yeah,
translates into business, because you do have
yeah,
those pressure cooker
definitely.
moments where you think you're going to explode, but you're still fine.
And I think it's also like important for people to realize, because it sounds great to talk about the stories in retrospect, but in the moment, you're still going to have your moments of freak out. You might make some bad decisions like in the heat of the moment, but uh,
Mhm.
the reason I say that is, like, I think it's also important for people not to expect perfection. Like, it's okay to not
Yeah.
be as for a moment in time to be as smooth about dealing with the pressure as you wish you could be, because that's going to be everybody. But the most important thing is not that moment; it's how you bounce back from it, how quickly you recover. And if
Yeah.
if you can recognize it, let it go, and then move on to the next thing, like that also has been something that we've all in this company been able to do. Something gets messed up, like, it happens, like, but you got to just you know give it a little bit of attention, then move on, like,
Yeah.
and don't let it bog you down.
Yeah. I mean, being able to take a punch and get back up, that's the real resilience that
Mhm.
and the characteristics you need when building a business and entrepreneurship. You're definitely showing that. And let me just ask you, I know you're dealing with pressure. You're surrounded by, the stakeholders, the employees. You're communicating with them. How do you show up for others when the stakes are high and the timelines are long?
I missed the end of your question. How do you show up for others, and then?
Yeah, how do you show up for others when the stakes are high and you are under those high pressure moments?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it changes sometimes, but the most important thing, I think, is to try to keep at least some eye on. I try to think about examining myself and how I'm reacting in the moment, sort of be an awareness of what what's coming up. I try to make sure that if I hear something that could be triggering to get into like a anxious or angry kind of state of mind, or worried or whatever, that, like, I try to keep in mind that I might not know all the information. Or if I hear about
Yeah.
something that happened, and I don't like the way it went down, like, I realize that that's only one side of the story. So I'm trying to come to people with a balanced perspective, or at least I need to make sure I've gathered enough information first before making any kind of judgments, or drawing any conclusions. And in a pressure situation, it gets even worse, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think that's important that I try to do. I mean, no one's perfect in how they embody these goals, right? But
Yeah.
I try to approach the other people that I'm working with, whether it's an employee or co-founder, or my spouse or my daughter, with, I'm under stress. Try to remember that if I overreact, apologize for it quickly. Say, oh,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I acted that way. Um, there was something else I was thinking about that I lost the train of thought about it. But I mean, it is there's an open mindedness to it, I guess. They're just like I was telling Yubi earlier that I have a general philosophy that I try to do, which is to stay curious all the
Hmm.
time. And I think when you allow pressure to get to you heavily, if you allow the fear to creep in a high pressure moment, or the anxiety, the ability to stay curious goes away. It's like, I don't have time for curious. I have to deal with the thing that's right in front of me. It's like survival
Hmm.
mode, right? And your aperture for what's possible gets really narrow. Like it's like, okay, all it's triage. Like all the other stuff is not important. It's only this one thing. But when you do that, you can't see the solution that might be right over here. Like you only see the solution that's right in front of you. And the only way to break out of that, I think, is to try to, even under pressure, realize that like there's probably other solutions that you haven't seen yet. And if the one that you're looking at looks really shitty solution, like look for another one. Like other things are probably possible. If a
Yeah.
solution looks like I have to fire everyone and just keep only myself, like that's a terrible solution.
Yeah.
Maybe there's another way. Like, so I mean that's an extreme kind of example, but like the point is I try to come to those moments with an idea of curiosity. I think if that one concept helps in so many ways to just keep the aperture wide about the possibilities that are out
The analogy I like to use is the fly on the window. The window's cracked open like this much, and the fly is just hitting the window. And all they got to
there.
do
Yeah,
is just,
go up a
you
little
know,
bit.
just go up a little bit and you can fly out. And it's like, but from my point of view, I can see the window. So it's like the reviewer or the creative person, and I know you'll appreciate this from a finance perspective. Once you're doing your analysis or you're in the middle of something, put it down, go to sleep, take a step back,
Yes.
and
Oh
then
my God.
jump into it, at another time, right? Give it a break,
Yeah.
revisit it.
I'm as prone to falling into that trap as, especially when it comes to like building a spreadsheet or something like that. It could just be a total black hole of time. Like,
Yeah. And
you
you could
know,
be missing the main, when you're looking at trends, you could be missing the
100%. You miss
main.
the big picture. Yeah.
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 Well, I want to ask you one more question before we get into our fun rapid fire questions. I feel like every CEO, executive, entrepreneur, successful businessman or woman has something from their childhood that either influenced them or was a tool or an environment that shaped how they operate today. Is there something that you can think of from your childhood that, whether it was your parents or a family member, or really just something you were just keen to do from the beginning, selling tools on the playground?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things from that time frame, I guess. Like, there's probably an influence that's bigger than I might even realize. Where my grandfather was a successful entrepreneur. I didn't know him that well because he died when I was, I don't know, 4 or something. I was a pretty little kid, but he was able to build up a business and sell it. My dad actually worked in his company. He sold his company and ended up buying a farm. And so when I knew him, he had the farm. It was after the sale of the company, but that is, as I've become an entrepreneur, I definitely think about what that path was, and I think that that may have influenced my mom and dad's approach to raising me in some ways because they saw that success. And
Hmm.
I've never actually even thought about that connection before, to be honest with you, or talked with them about it. But one of the features of my childhood, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in the countryside, rural area. Every house was separated by like an acre and a half if they were nearby each other. And of course, in those days, like there were no cell phones or any of that kind of stuff. So you went out and you basically, like me and my friends, we could go across miles if we wanted to through other people's property, and it was totally fine. Like that's just what people did. They went out, and the kids it was a kind of an independence that I think was really special in creating. And I'm not unique from that generation of having that kind of independence, but it definitely helped forge this, um, you know, like ability to solve my own problems. Like you go out into the woods, you get lost, no
Yeah.
one's coming to help you. You can't call for help. You just have to figure it out.
Hmm.
And we tried things, and and I guess I don't know if this is innate or if it's from that upbringing, but I have always been the kind of person as a child who was really excited about trying new experiences, like going to new places. I always went away to summer camp. I never got homesick. Like it wasn't like I didn't like my home. I did. I always had a great upbringing, but I felt free. So my parents did a
Mhm.
great job in giving me like enough freedom to be able to learn to trust myself and take chances, and that I could figure it out, I guess. And then going off to summer camps that were sleepaway and stuff at an early age, like that, those experiences help to crystallize that instinct in me to go out and explore the world. And that drive to explore and go on an adventure is one of the fundamental things that almost requires me to do something like entrepreneurship. I just need that kind
Yeah.
of that experience
Adventure.
of adventure and uncertainty and like risk taking and rewards that could come from it, and all those things, like the variability of it all, and experiencing new things. um I'll mention another quick story. It's just because it made me think of it. I think it's interesting to this point, but my daughter has some of those characteristics, I've noticed. When I went to the International Space University, she was 3 years old. She didn't want to see me go away. 9 weeks sounds like an eternity to a 3-year-old. Like,
Hmm.
might as well be forever. And I told her, she knew that I was interested in space. And I told her, like, hey, I want to do this thing. I think, I can build a company and maybe help make the possibility to go to space more real for everybody if we can make a big impact and do something, help the industry move forward. And so, someday maybe what we're working on could help me, help the industry so that you and I could go to the moon together. So I sort of made a date with my daughter that we were going to go on, like, to me, one of the ultimate adventures, like go, into space, and even up to space and go to the moon someday. And I think it's possible. Like, this is something that is much
Yeah.
closer than most people realize. But that adventure, I think, is
Well, that future date with your daughter is super sweet. I have 3 kids, and my youngest just turned 3, so she's in the I
yeah.
love you daddy phase, which I'm obsessed with.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and it's
Nice.
funny because back in the day, they say that your parents wouldn't know where you are for hours, and you would just come home at late at night, and it's just like, okay, go wash your hands, come inside, and it was normal. Whereas now it's like, it's kind of
Go wash your hands
scary.
with the hose outside.
Right. Go drink some water, with the
yeah.
hose. Nowadays, you're like, let me filter it through, 4 or 5 different sources. I feel like I could ask you a ton more questions and dive deeper into finance and,
Sure.
and all these different things in your background. You have tons of knowledge. But I want to just quickly close with 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Number
I'll
one,
do short answers.
perfect, perfect. What's one metric you check every single week without fail?
Cash.
That's
I
a
mean,
big
like,
one.
if there's any one metric, where's your cash balance and where's it going? That's the most important thing.
That's a 75% common answer. Now, what's one book, podcast, it could be a presentation that you recommend?
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, I haven't looked at it a lot recently, but certainly that book Bold made a real impact on me. So if somebody's thinking about, like, do I have the knowledge to do something in another industry, that book is great for that. Like, to set a mindset of exponential possibilities and thinking about things in that way that's nonlinear, and utilizing the skills of other people. For me, it was
Mhm.
just the right book at the right time, very inspirational.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, finish this sentence for me. A founder or leader under pressure should always.
Stay curious, for sure. That's why I brought it up before.
That's perfect. Gary, this was great. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I know we're going to have another one in the future. Thanks for joining.
Sounds good. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, nice to be with you. Appreciate it.
All right. I'm going to leave this on for one more second because I want to ask you a fun question, which if you tell me don't share it or not, but other but there's something about space that I always hear. You hear this more from like conspiracy theorists. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, but The
There's a
firmament.
lot of ways you could go with
The
it.
firmament. Do you know about this thing? The firmament?
Firmament. Okay. I mean,
It's like
that
it's
has
like
a
a
meaning.
biblical concept that there's like
Yes,
a
like yeah. That, like the firmament is like
flow.
the earth and the ground. It's like
So there's this concept,
connection.
that, and a lot of Christians bring it, not to go to the Bible or religion, but that there's like a dome around the world where you
Oh yeah,
can't actually like go through, called the
one of my
firmament.
old friends, like one of my old best friends from growing up, like presented this 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 theory to me
And I
years
can't
ago.
I can't wrap my head around it because we have SpaceX. I feel like we've been to the moon. We've been, I feel like, there's also those that say that that was all fake,
We
or,
didn't go to the moon, right?
we
Yeah,
didn't go to the
right.
moon. I mean, are we on the same page? Is there any insights that
So
I'm
okay,
missing?
so I think that it's not correct, first of all, which you might have guessed. But I think that like there's some interesting reasons why some of these ideas sound believable, and there's some science that people lean on that they use to like back up their point. So,
Hmm.
was the moon landing faked? Okay, I mean, I'm quite certain that if I ever get to go to the moon and I went to where the lander is, I will see it. Like I don't think it was fake, but I think it's plausible to expect that during the Cold War, that would I be also surprised if I heard that the U.S. government had a backup plan to do a fake moon landing? I would not be surprised in
Yeah.
that context. During the Cold War, lots of crazy stuff was attempted back then for like misdirection and
Yep. Yep.
so because of those things sound plausible, it's easy to think that the rest of the story sounds plausible. And the other, I've seen people do breakdowns of the moon landing and the reasons people give about the lighting and so on, but it's a
Mhm.
misunderstanding of how light and shadow works when there's no atmosphere and at the angles they were at with the different rocks and so on. So I think all those other ideas that go along with that to sort of support it are pretty easily addressed anyway. Without going there with your own eyes, I guess you can't prove anything to yourself anymore because people can make up anything. So it's
Yeah.
pretty hard to prove things these days. But on the idea of the firmament and this like bubble around the Earth that makes it impossible to go beyond low Earth orbit or something. Like I think people
Hmm.
believe that there's a space station and people are there, but you can't get past that. Like why haven't we gone past that since so many decades if that wasn't
Right.
true? And the other thing that people lean on that backs that up is this idea of the Van Allen belts, which you may have heard of or people may have heard of,
Mm-mm.
which is that around the Earth, we have this electromagnetic field that's created by the rotation. That's a magnetic field that drives the compass and everything else. But that electromagnetic field
Okay.
is what protects Earth from like radiation that comes from the sun. And if we didn't have that, there would be no life on Earth, or certainly not in the same format. Um,
Yeah.
so that protects us. But what also happens is that in the Van Allen belts, these highly charged particles accumulate. So if you look at a drawing of the Earth and you draw the radiation belts, there's like the Earth, and then there's low Earth orbit, which doesn't have the radiation belts. And then above low Earth orbit, there's these radiation belts, which is pretty, I don't remember how many kilometers, but like a couple thousand kilometers distance,
Right.
where it's just very high radiation levels because it collects all this high energy particles. And then there's another one of those, there's another gap of area where that's not, and there's another Van Allen belt. So there's two layers of this. And I could see somebody believing like, oh, you can't survive that as a human. Like, how could you go through those? Um, the answer is, you're in a metal capsule and you're going quickly through them. If you go quickly enough through them, you can definitely survive them. You can do the math to see what the dose is that you're going to get. So but there are some scientific things that people lean on that helps to support these ideas. And that's as far as I know about that firmament concept. But
Perfect. It's such an
I don't
interesting.
believe it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you just being a space expert, I wanted to get your thoughts on it, and We don't, I won't post that. It was more for, I'm actually going to pause this real
Yeah.
quick. That's it for today's episode of Growth Under Pressure. I'm Eric Josovitz from Adapt CFO, and I hope these insights help you tackle your biggest scaling challenges. If you want to help other founders find the show, give us a quick follow or a share. Thanks for listening, and I hope to catch you next time.